Vladimir Kara-Murza Jr., a known Putin opponent, is near death from an apparent poisoning.
He was working at his Moscow office on Tuesday when he suddenly collapsed.
His father reportedly said there was some sort of acute intoxication.
His wife says he has not regained consciousness at all since he initially collapsed.
Something happened to this other opponent, opposition leader, who was tied to Nemtsov.
Boris Nemtsov, who earlier this year was gunned down.
They killed him the old-fashioned way. He was just shot dead by somebody in a moving car as he walked on a Moscow street.
It's not a great thing to be an opposition leader in Russia.
Apparently, no, it's not. The man we were talking about most recently is a guy named Vladimir Kara-Murza. He's a journalist, author, and anti-Putin activist who, until a couple of weeks ago, was running an opposition group inside Russia called Open Russia. He was also working very closely with the other man who you saw, which is a story we covered here, a man named Boris Nemtsov, another opposition leader. And joining me in Miranda right now for more on the mysterious case of Mr. Kara-Murza and Boris Nemtsov, as well as a host of others, Newsmax's chief Washington correspondent John Gizzi and Craig Copetasoins, a man who has covered Russia extensively for many years, including with the Moscow Times. He now works for Quartz, which is part of Atlantic Media, and it's an honor to have you both here with us for this discussion.
Hello.
All right, Craig, well, let's start with you. Mr. Kara-Murza was working for this group called Open Russia. Of course, they were actively working to promote free journalism in Russia and also as activists with the opposition party there. How are we not supposed to immediately jump to the conclusion that Putin or somebody very close to him was directly involved with this poisoning and the murder of Mr. Nemtsov?
It's pretty hard not to. Historically, one would think that this was a government operation. All of this goes back to the days of Stalin, when he had a fellow called Grigory Mayankovsky. Mayankovsky was a poison expert. He was a Vincent Price type character, and he developed a number of what they called poudre de succession, inheritance powders, that would kill people. This was very sophisticated assassination, and this type of assassination technique has been going on in the Soviet Union since its inception, and of course back during the Tsarist times.
Right.
Well, let's talk about a few of the other opposition faces who have fallen to poisonings or gunshots, shall we? Here we have Sergei Yushchenko, which happened only just a few years ago after Putin came into power. Then we have Anna Politkovskaya, who was poisoned first, then shot. And some might remember Alexander Litvinenko, who was poisoned with a radioactive element, and he implicated Putin directly before he died. And we could just go on and on and on. So I want to ask you, let's start with you, John. Have Europe, NATO, and the United States directly addressed Putin or his government on any of these killings and implicated Putin directly or someone else in Moscow?
No, NATO has been very stalwart in its opposition to Putin with his stand in Crimea. But on this, because it's an internal matter, one finds that the Western alliance, including this country, are very, very circumspect about their comments. Now, as this program noted, when Boris Nemtsov was shot, the president put out a very strong statement about him and underscored his words by sending the U.S. ambassador to the funeral. I asked Josh Earnest at the White House if they would make the same statement about Vladimir Kara-Murza, who was then in grave condition in the hospital 6 days after the poisoning. They said they would get back to me if they had something. To this day, they have not yet commented on that.
That's what's interesting. You look back at the response after the Nemtsov killing, and actually the Russian ambassador, I believe, went to the crime scene there. I remember seeing an interview with him in a trench coat talking about that very provocative action. But we look at this situation, John and Craig, as these leaders are meeting currently as we speak in Germany right now during the G7 summit. Craig, do you expect any kind of concrete additional sanctions to come out of these meetings? Is maybe that why the White House was kind of hedging their bets on what they were going to say to Mr. Gizzi?
No. Look, academics and diplomats by way of campaign contribution tend to treat Putin and Russia as a savage and alien society. Look, this is a false pathology in that it fails to realize that what's going on in Russia begins at home. There's a naivete amongst most alleged Kremlinologists and Sovietologists these days. Remember something, Putin could never have succeeded in any of these events that you just described had he operated against the grain of Russian culture. Call it fashionable ruthlessness if you want, but this is what Russia is and how it operates. Now, granted, there are a lot of counter voices in Russia which the majority of Americans can't even pronounce their names correctly. All of the individuals you mentioned come from the Mikhail Khodorkovsky school.
Right.
Now, Khodorkovsky is, he's no clean gene. But
well, let's take a pause real quick because we got to go to a commercial break. We're going to come back and we're going to talk a little bit more about the current state of the opposition movement inside Moscow. When we come back, John Gizzi, Greg Copetasoins coming back with us after this.
And welcome back to our Newsmax Now Roundtable. We want to welcome once again Newsmax's John Gizzi and Craig Copetasoins from Quartz, a new offshoot of Atlantic Media. And Craig, we want to apologize. Earlier we said you worked for Moscow Times, but you were actually a journalist for the Wall Street Journal. Our apologies.
That's correct.
Just want to make that clarification. All right, so I want to continue with what you were saying because we unfortunately had to go to a commercial break.
Yeah, and Craig, as we were saying this, I want to play a clip real quick. President Obama today at the culmination of the G7 summit talking about Putin and Russia specifically and Putin's decision. Let's take a listen.
He's got to make a decision. Does he continue to wreck his country's economy and continue Russia's isolation in pursuit of a wrong-headed desire to recreate the glories of the Soviet Empire? Or does he recognize that Russia's greatness does not depend on violating the territorial integrity and sovereignty of other countries?
Now, Craig, with that comment coming from the president, not exactly a tear down this wall kind of speech there, but does that indicate that naivete you were discussing earlier?
I would suggest that it does. If you take all your politics and ideologies off the table, at least in my lifetime, the only American president who knew how to deal with the Soviets or the Russians, and I was there to observe it firsthand, was Ronald Reagan. Say what you will about the man for anything else he did, he knew how to deal with the Russians. He knew how to build an effective counterpunch to the Soviet ideology at home. As for Obama's statement that nobody likes Russia, he couldn't be more wrong. Russia and the Kremlin and Putin right now have a modern age Comintern, funneling money into Western Europe and all other parts of the world in support of Kremlin policies. A lot of nations, you cannot look at you cannot look at Russia through an American lens. You have to look through it at a Russian lens. And the Russian lens right now, which a lot of the world is agreeing with, is countries and individuals are getting tired of the United States using the extraterritorial enforcement of domestic U.S. law to try and accomplish things in foreign lands. This is going to become a large issue over the next 12 months, and you can watch it. Now, why Obama has a problem here is he doesn't have any allies in the dissident community. As I was saying before, Khodorkovsky is not an effective spokesperson at all. He doesn't even speak English. Attempts to get him to become an effective spokesperson have been turned down by him and his people. The only other person you have is Garry Kasparov, who's a brilliant man, but he's very much into agitprop and laughed at in the Soviet Union, in Russia. And so what you're left with is something like Pussy Riot, which gets bigger crowds in Brooklyn than they do in Moscow.
Right, and we look at this all through. Also, you see what's going on in Ukraine. We have these military drills conducted. Surprise, surprise, Vladimir Putin has, some say 9, some say 12,000 Russian forces right there on the border with these Eastern European countries. Is he preparing, John, do you think, for another invasion like he did of Crimea, because there doesn't seem to be anybody willing to stop him?
Well, I wouldn't say that. I would say that certainly he is going to rattle his saber, notably at Moldova. I would keep my eye on any of the countries that have a substantial Russian-speaking population, and that's quite a few of them. Moldova, Lithuania come to mind right away. Remember, Bismarck once said, love is blind and friendship tries not to see bad things. Many people in the West now, notably Greece and its government under Mr. Tsipras, look to Russia as someone who can bail them out in the event they cannot make their payments to the 3 lenders at the end of the month. So I think what Craig said is correct. There's going to be a warmer feeling in Europe toward Russia than one would think in this country. I would say regarding Khodorkovsky, it's true he doesn't speak English. His skirts are not clean, then again, few are, and yet he made a very strong impression when he came to this country, and his son served as his interpreter at different meetings.
I would disagree with you, John. I would disagree with you. Khodorkovsky does not have the juice of a Solzhenitsyn or a Sakharov or a Pasternak or a Bulgatkov, and certainly does not have the juice of even Bill Browder, who is arguably the most effective spokesperson for the Russian dissident community right now, and he's British.
All right, well, gentlemen, we're going to have to wrap it up there because unfortunately we are out of time, but we will have you both back to continue this discussion because, as we heard from Mr. Copetasoins, it is not going to go away, and it deserves our attention because so many things in this world deal with U.S.-Russian relations. That's the genesis of a lot of our problems. Right now, though, we wanted to give you a quick look at what's going to be happening in your neighborhood today. A quick look at the forecast. Take a look right here. Looks like we're going to have 90s in Texas and across, and then some severe weather moving across the Northeast today, and unseasonably cool temperatures there in the Northeast. So look out there in New York and up along the eastern seaboard. High of 84 in Atlanta, hometown there, 88 in Washington, D.C., and 81 in New York. Coming back with more Newsmax now right after this.